Patience. I'm going to introduce the school board. This is Walter to my left, Walter Bro, he's the clerk. I'm Gina Dyer, the co-chair, Matt Coombs, and Deb Hebert. Mike Hebert, the chair, is up in Montpelier. So Matt's going to review our proposed budget, and then we'll take questions.
So on the first page, we have the revenue that comes into the school, and there's not a lot of changes here. You'll see the biggest change is a loss of $37,030, and that's because that's a special education sub-grant, and all special education costs are now a district expense, so that income would go to the district as well. So it's no longer on our side, but it's on the WSESU side. And then at the bottom, under other local, there's a fund balance and educational reserve of $88,561. And we're proposing to put that money into our educational reserve fund to help potentially defer taxes down the road, because this is the last year that Vernon enjoys a 75% tax rate from the state of Vermont. And in the fiscal year 2017, we'll be at 83%, and then eventually phase out to a full 100% by 2019. So we can, by not returning that to the taxpayers and putting it in that fund, we can raise that money at 25% less this year than what it will cost 3 years from now. On page 2, we get into our expenses. The first few items are to do with the teachers' salaries. The teachers, I guess they're in the last year of their contract this year, so those are estimated numbers of where the supervisor union thinks the totals might fall when the contract's settled. It's just a best guess at this point. Then under paraprofessionals, it is up about $5,000, but there's going to be some shuffling underneath the paraprofessional line, and there'll be a big reduction under the special ed paraprofessionals, which is on page 5. I don't know if Dana wants to go there now or not. Page 5. You'll see that line item's down $41,853. So really what that is all about is there will be one less para position here next year.
That's actually coming, the reason you don't see that in the same way in the budget is there was a para position that was listed as being a 504 position.
It wasn't coded quite the same way, so it's getting shifted over.
And so that got folded, yeah.
It's getting shifted over to the other side, but there actually will be a net reduction of 1 in the paraprofessional staff at the school.
Just going to try to focus this a little bit.
I'm not really sure.
About halfway down, technology, oh, back to page 2, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Technology update and hardware. Right there. That item for $10,000 would be to purchase new Chromebooks and a new cart for the Chromebooks, because all of the students will now be taking their smarter balance assessments on computers, and it creates a need for more computers in the school to meet the demand of the federal testing. Then you'll see under instructional technology, just a little further down, that it's $19,000 that's not there, and that's because new staff computers were bought in this current budget that we're in now, and there's not a need for that again for hopefully quite a few years. On page 3, the only major difference is in the nurses' salary and benefits, under health services, and that's attributed to a retirement and a new staff member that's not as high on the pay scale. On page 4, there's really no major changes. And you'll see the net result for the Vernon Elementary School is an increase of 1.37%. Or a total of $33,803. page 5. Big changes are under the 504, under secondary tuition and vocational ed. There's a -17, and that's actually part of what was discussed before with the paras. That's a position that's moved to the regular staff paraprofessional budget and is no longer under this portion of the budget. And then at the bottom, there's 98,450 because it's been 2 school years, fiscal years, since there's been funding for the capital plan. So we'd like to put 98,450 into the capital plan this year. And again, kind of on the high side, thinking that as it's going to be more costly to raise money in the next few years, to pre-fund some of this stuff ahead of time makes more sense. We get to page 6, which is all the financial calculations that we're actually going to let Frank Drucker, our finance administrator for the district, explain.
Sure. Okay, so unfortunately, I think you have a handout. It might be a little easier to read. This is a document that's developed by the Agency of Education, and it's intended to provide a projected tax rate for the budget that you're considering, and then also give you a look back as to where we've come. So it has the 4-year history. So as Matt just explained, the $4,414,000 is the first number you see on the document. That's the total proposed budget. To calculate a tax rate, the funding formula basically looks at 2 other key factors. One is enrollment, and then revenue that's not the education fund. So revenues such as special education income, that's probably the largest source of funds, and then transportation aid. If we had tuition students, I think we have a couple budgeted, that type of revenue. So the state takes the $4,414,000, subtracts the revenue that I was describing. That's on line 10, $634,810, and we get a net education spending. So that's the basis of then calculating cost per student. So you see we have $4,400,000 minus the $634 gives us the $3,779,000 on that line 14. And divided by our 224 equalized students that this budget has committed to. And what that is pre-K through 6 plus those kids not going to UHS, the tuition expenses. That's the 224, which is, you know, a bigger number than what you would think of folks in the building. But you divide those two numbers, 3,779,000 by the 224, and we get the 16,832 on line 16. That's the equalized cost per student. You can see it compares to 15,431. So it is up, and this is why many communities in Vermont are seeing taxes going up, even though spending is either flat or even down. So as Matt indicated, spending is about 1% increase, but taxes are going up about 8% in this projected scenario. And the reason is that enrollment has declined. You see on line 15, going from 232 down to 224, using just round numbers. So that's a decline of 3%, and if our spending doesn't decline at the same rate as enrollment, then the tax rate goes up. That's one reason why we don't have the same tax rate increase as our spending. Another reason why is, remember we started with spending minus revenues. Well, again, revenues are down. See? Line 10, we went from 772 down to 634. So that's the second thing that is out of balance with the funding formula, that is saying, okay, well, if your revenues haven't kept up, and your student population hasn't kept up with the spending level, then the tax rate is what closes the gap. So that brings us down to line 27. Just as a recap, spending minus revenue divided by kids gives us line 27, which is this, it's a factor. The factor is our 16,833 in spending per student dividing by a state statistic, that number 9,459. That is 177%. Our number, 16,832, is 177% of the state index, 9,452. They just take that number there, that 177, they multiply it times whatever the governor and the legislature passes a statewide property tax. This year it's $1, and that's our tax rate for most communities, or $1.77. But in Vernon, this is the last year that we have a 75% proportion of the full rate because of a past agreement. So we get discounted. We don't pay the $1.77, we pay $1.33 in Vernon. That's what Matt was alluding to. We have an incentive this year to add to our reserve at this lower tax rate that we pay into to fund education. Next year, that discount goes from 75% to 83%. And then the following year it goes to 91%, and then the following year it goes to 100%. So unfortunately, in the next 3 years, if we do nothing, if we froze everything, we're still going to see this 25% increase, and we'll look a lot like the rest of the state in terms of school tax rates. So the formula also has a weighting for, of course, we have to fund our secondary education for Vernon students. The folks that are attending tuition-based programs are in this budget, and then there's the BUHS budget that is on the second part of this document. So this document says on line 29 that 66% of our kids are either here in the building or they're part of this tuition-based budgeting for 712. Then the balance, so 33%, we see that all the way down on line 35, are at BUHS. So then it's just a simple weighted average calculation of tax rates. We take 6% of Vernon's $1.33, and we take 33% of the BUHS tax rate, which is about $1.80, and you take the weighted average of those numbers, and then you do this common level of appraisal statistic that makes sure everybody across the state is paying an equal amount based on tax assessed property. And you get those bottom numbers. $1.21 is our projected actual tax rate, the bottom there, which compares to the $1.119, or a 9.1 cent increase, which is an 8% change. This would be for folks that are paying property taxes. The other statistic that's important, line 33, is the income cap, the income percent cap. So the state has a measure that says if a family is earning less than $90,000, then they will be subject to the provisions of the income cap, which says you won't pay anything more than 3.45% of your household income. But if you're above that, or if you're a business, that's on a homestead in 2 acres. So if you have more than a homestead in 2 acres, then you do pay the property tax rate. But if not, then you're subject to that number. And you can see that that number is not significantly different than the prior year, 3.22. So that's an overview of the tax calculations and how we get there.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Ron, would you like to say something?
So I am Vernon School Superintendent of Schools. So we've worked on this budget probably for about a month and a half, and I think what we always try to look at when we see the first draft is to try to maintain the programs that we know are successful, and considering the tax impact and the cost to the community. We have made some adjustments. We've reduced some of the para-educator positions within the budget. Matt had mentioned the assumptions that we made on teaching salaries. That number, that 4%, is not indicative of any sort of settlement or negotiations. That's just looking at our current staff, plugging in where they are with a step, and then some of that increase is because people move up the columns for professional development, higher education, so they get some higher salary as related to that. The health benefit, we were told that it would be up 4.5% this year, so we plugged that number in. Throughout these line items, we have made reductions in small categories, looking at what we've actually spent from year to year and trying to decide how we can cut a little bit more in each of the categories. So we've done that through the last 3 meetings. And we feel that it's a very responsive budget to maintain the programs here at the school, but also make some reductions as well. And I think Frank explained in good detail the impact on the taxes as it related to this document. So we would welcome comments, any sort of questions or information that we can provide to you.
No questions?
I'm not a resident, so I don't know if I count, but I gotta ask, because everybody's sitting there. So it's just the one paraprofessional position? And I mean, what's the terminology? Is it, are we eliminating that position? Are we shifting that position? It wasn't clear.
There's several things going on. There's one position that is going to be eliminated. Is it class?
So there's a regular education para position is being eliminated. And that's the position that's affected.
And then some other things were just being realigned for accounting purposes, really, just to make sure they're in the right categories.
But the
So it was really a shuffling. There's really only one reduction in staff.
one.
Yes.
Ron had mentioned making minor cuts elsewhere, different line items. Are there any sort of programmatic reductions at all? Anything you had to cut or reduce as far as offerings or class, anything like that? I would assume not, you're not cutting any teaching positions.
Right. At this point, there's nothing in the budget. I mean, the first budget is what we feel we need to best represent our students, and that's not factored into this budget.
Can I get one more?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm just thinking back to last year, and I remember at those forums, for some reason, the technology investment kept coming up. You guys remember that?
I try and forget.
So there's, I think, Matt, you said 10,000 in the
Yes.
budget, and that's, if I understood you correctly, a computer investment. Can you sort of reiterate why the board feels that there's a need for that stuff?
I can speak to that.
Sure.
So this year, we brought 2 Chromebook carts and 40 Chromebooks into our fleet of computers. Prior to that, what we had was our tech lab, and then some pretty old computers, so there might be 1 computer in the classroom. As soon as we brought those Chromebooks into the classrooms, teachers are using them. So those Chromebooks are constantly being signed out and brought into the classrooms. The hope is that eventually we might be able to be in a place where we can have classrooms that have one-to-one computer capabilities to allow our students to be really consistent with all of the other schools that are around us. This is what people are doing. And so, yes, they do allow us to take the tests, but more importantly, they allow us to do all of the things that you and I already do almost every day. We want our kids to know how to use computers as tools for learning.
So the 10,000 is for how many?
It's for 20 it's an additional cart and 20 more Chromebooks.
You can tell that I'm not really well versed in this stuff. You say cart or cart?
Cart.
Cart.
So the cart so it makes sure that they're maintained and well taken care of. It's a place to put them. It's also a way to transport them.
I know, Bill, the 2 carts and the 40 that were bought was bought actually with a grant money from Vermont Yankee.
Right.
So that's where that came from.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you all for coming.